No, I just didn't want to. Okay. Hi, I'm Tony. I think I know everybody here and everybody online, so that's good. This presentation was my idea, and so that's why I'm the immigration team today. The reason I wanted to do this presentation is that we first had Ngwa join our family, and then our congregation stepped up and agreed to sponsor Snejana and her family. As we've gone through this journey over the last several years, it's really obvious that immigration law changes all the time. And although we're wanting to have an asylum seeker ministry specifically here, people don't always come in with the same status that we're expecting. And we need to learn a little bit about our immigrants and what their particular situation is to most adequately show our Christian lump to them. So that's why I wanted to do this. So I would like this to be as interactive as possible. So you can just interrupt me whenever. All right. And I'm happy to answer any questions as we go or focus on a specific thing as we go. First of all, I think, how many attorneys are in this room right now? Emily? Oh, okay, I am not an attorney. I am certainly not an immigration attorney. So everything that from the immigration law stuff that I'm presenting is basically straight out of the US Customs and Immigration website. And we won't go down any rabbit holes with immigration law because we would never ever get out because it's such a mess. So if you come away from this presentation with anything other than our immigration system is totally and completely broken in this country, then I will have done my job. So let's talk about asylum first. Asylum is the thing we encountered first at our house when we said we would welcome Ngwa into our home. And Ngwa came here seeking asylum from Cameroon. Is there anybody who doesn't know his story that's here? Or if anybody who wants to hear it briefly, again, kind of a long story. You want to hear it again? Yeah, okay. So in 2018, Ngwa left Cameroon, left his family, fled from persecution by
I'm trying
his
to see how to do that without getting totally out of it.
Are you on mute?
No.
You gotta get on mute.
I don't know what. Fled persecution by his government after he said he attended peaceful protests. I think he was one of the main leaders of the, that's my opinion. I said, what did you really do to get yourself into this mess? And he said, well, I have trouble keeping my mouth shut when something isn't right. So there you go. So he was jailed and he was in prison, he thinks, for about 2 to 3 weeks. It's kind of hard to tell when you're in prison what's going on. He was tortured during the entire time, and he finally collapsed one day, and they thought they had finally killed him, which was their intent. And he was being persecuted by his own government because he was protesting for equal rights for the English-speaking minority in Cameroon. Cameroon is a French majority country, French-speaking majority. It's run by a dictator. It has heavy French influence, and there are 2 areas of Cameroon, the Northwest and the Southwest, that were formerly English rule and that speak English. And over time, the English speaking minority systematically had their rights taken away, and now it's descended into civil war because the majority wants the natural resources that are in their area and are trying to get rid of the English speaking owners of those resources so they can have it all for themselves. It's always about money and power. So that's what happened. So there were nationwide protests by the English speakers, just asking for fair treatment. And the leaders were sought out and jailed, and he was, I think, one of them, although I don't know if he'll admit that. So he fled into Nigeria, but then Nigeria was cooperating with the Cameroonian government to pursue them. And somehow he got his cousin, got him money and his Cameroonian passport, and he got on a plane to Quito, Ecuador, because there's a visa-free visitor agreement. You can just go be a tourist in Quito when you're fleeing. So he decided he did that, and he got out of Nigeria, got on a plane. I said, why didn't they get you? He said, well, because we're not as organized as the United States is. So he got out, and he got to Quito and realized that he wasn't going to be able to bring his wife and his daughter, who was at that time 17 months old, to Ecuador. He stuck out like a sore thumb. He was big and black. Everybody was small and Ecuadorian, and people were trying to scam him. And, you know, he said, this isn't the place for my family. Nobody looks like me here. So he started moving, and he basically started moving toward the United States. And he went through a journey through up into Colombia, and then a harrowing journey through the Panamanian desert that he survived. Along the way, he met other Cameroonians, and they started traveling together and helping each other survive this journey, and just kept going through the Central American countries until he got into Mexico. And then when he was in Mexico, he thought, I'm just going to the United States. Because, you know, of their great humanitarian rights, reputation, and all that. Now, this was in 2018, right? He got into the United States he got to Matamoros, Mexico, to the border in June of 2019. And at that time, the previous administration had enacted they had proposed two really important laws. One was Remain in Mexico, where they were making immigrants stay, and they'd assign, as they got to a border, you got to sign a number, and you got to cross the bridge when your number was called, and you had X hours to get across the border when your number was called. But there was, you know, really poor communication as to which numbers were on which days, and a lot of graft with it. So, and then the other policy that Trump was considering implementing, that they had proposed but not enacted, was the third-party transit bar. There are bars to getting asylum, and this was the rule that they said, you have to apply for asylum in the first country you get to. You can't come all the way up here And that was during the time of the caravans. Remember all those migrant caravans? And they were trying to prevent these caravans from showing up at the border all the time. And so they enacted this, well, they proposed this bar that was enacted into code on the 16th of July. He reached the border in June. It wasn't a law yet, neither was Remain in Mexico, but because of the way things were being enforced, they finally enacted the transit bar 10 days. He got to the border 10 days after they enacted it. He got across the border 10 days after they enacted it. So he was effectively barred from asylum because of that third party thing. Asylum is asylum from something. You are fleeing from something and you come somewhere to seek asylum from the something, and the something is your country. Your own country is the persecutor. And asylum criteria are really strict. People come to the United States and ask for asylum for, what do you think the biggest reason that people try and cross the border is? Ideas? Anybody? Safety is one of them. The most common reason people come to cross the border is to get a job. They're trying to find money to support their family. You look at these criteria, you're trying to, you get a possibility of getting asylum on the basis of persecution because of your race, your religion, your nationality, membership in a particular social group, like somebody who speaks English in a French-speaking African country, or your political opinion. Now, if you think about Ngwa's story, his chances of getting asylum were really strong because he hit several of these points. But most people who come to the border, who swim the river, who do all those things, they're trying to get jobs to support their family. Nowhere on this list is persecution because of a famine or, you know, although climate change and all the myriad reasons why people are in grave economic distress and coming to the border to try and get jobs here. You can only file this application if you're in the United States. If you ask to come to the United States and you're still in another country, then you're trying to become a refugee. The only difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker is where you are when you ask. If you're in the US, you're seeking asylum. If you're in another country trying to get here, you're trying to become a refugee. So that's that. You have to apply for asylum within a year of crossing the border. Any questions about all that? Okay. So if we think about what happened to Ngwa, he came, when you get to the United States, especially at the time when he got there, you ask for asylum and then they throw you in jail, and they call it detention, but you get imprisoned, and they have you perform a credible fear interview. Now, back at the time when he got here, this is the current asylum rules right here. The only one that was available to him when he came was defensive asylum. And he did a credible fear interview at the border, and they said, oh yeah, you meet the criteria for getting asylum, we'll let you in. And then they put him on a bus and sent him to Chicago, and from there to the Dodge detention center in Juneau, Wisconsin. Because they had as they were bringing people in and letting these court cases wait for an immigration hearing, they had to put them somewhere. So there's this huge nationwide series of public and privately sponsored detention centers. And he happened to end up at the Dodge County, basically the Dodge County jail. And you're shackled, you put in a cell. He had his roommate was an aggravated assault. I mean, that was a pretty dark time for him. When he got to Dodge County he got there in July, and he finally was released from detention, basically on good behavior, at that beginning of November. And the reason he got released is because he got represented by the UW Law School Immigrant Justice Clinic. And he clearly had a strong asylum case. He clearly, he could speak English. The students, the way this clinic works is that Erin Barbado is the law school professor that teaches the immigration law classes, and she supervises the law students in offering legal services to people at Dodge Detention Center. So he signed up to do that, and he got assigned to an amazing young woman named Maggie, who was his student attorney, and she was just all over it. How many of you remember Maggie? Maggie's just amazing. And so they started preparing his case, and in the meantime, he joined the ranks of hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers waiting for an immigration judge to hear their case. That's just what happened. It was and I think you all know the story about how he ended up living with us, right? Anybody not? Okay. Midvale member Ben Kempinen is a retired law school professor, and he's chair of our social ministry committee here. And he knew that within the year before, I had started getting really interested in the whole immigration mess. And I formed this group called the Immigration Action Team. It's an ad hoc group that you guys still let us have our thing. And we started doing things like we got Midvale to be a supporting congregation with the Dane Sanctuary Coalition. We started doing things like this, talks about immigration, updates with the congregation, and brought in speakers and that kind of thing. But Ben said, Ben got an email from Erin Barbado, the head of the law school program, saying, I've got this guy. We are taking on his case. His housing fell through just as they released him from detention. We desperately need to find a place for this guy to live. He's of impeccable character. His behavior was just amazing in detention. He's smart. He speaks English. He was supposed to live with his cousin who's a citizen. And at the last minute, her landlord said, no, he can't come and live with you. And so there was this mad scramble because the condition of his getting released from detention is having a place to live with the US citizen. So Ben forwards me this email that he got from Erin, said, you've been doing stuff with the immigration community here. Is there any help for him? And I replied, the Dane Sanctuary Coalition is starting to help asylum seekers because they're not getting people asking for sanctuary since they formed. and they're looking at ways to help asylum seekers. So you could try contacting them. And then when Mark, my husband, got home from his curling game, I had forwarded this email from Ben. And when he got home, I said, "Did you see your email?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Should we have some guy from Cameroon come and live with us?" And he goes, "Well, there's no reason why not," which just, I still can't believe he said that. But we talked about it and we thought, well, there's no reason why he already was vetted. We didn't know his name or anything, but that didn't matter. And so we told Ben that if the Sanctuary Coalition couldn't help him, he could live with us. So that's what ended up happening. And it's been an amazing 3 years now. 3 years since he came to live with us. He normally wouldn't have stayed that long, but you know, he's just the coolest guy. He's just fine. He stays in this bedroom. We have a really good setup for him. He quickly became family. So that's just the way it is. The landscape has changed with the Biden administration, although it's taken an awful long time, in my opinion, to have it happen. But one of the first things that the Biden administration did when he started working on immigration was that they vacated that third country transit barrier to asylum. So now all of a sudden, Gua's case could move forward again. And after 2 years, about 2 years after he came to live with us in September 1st, 2021, he was granted asylum by a judge in Chicago. And it might have been one of the most emotionally stirring things that's ever happened to me, listening to that. An immigration trial is really a defensive thing. There's a prosecuting attorney from Homeland Security whose job is to get you back out of the country and sent home. And your attorneys. And Maggie presented his case. Bless her heart, she just did great. They had this file on his qualifications for asylum that was like this. They got these expert witnesses to get on the phone and testify. The Homeland Security guy, poor guy, his only argument was that his torture injuries could have been because he was a soccer player and got hurt during soccer. So, but the immigration judge, when she was started saying, okay, this is the criteria you have to meet when you claim asylum, and she started ticking through them, and Mark and I were there being really quiet. And all of a sudden it became obvious. She was like just describing exactly what his qualifications were. And he said he had no idea whether he was going to get it or not. And Maggie was being accompanied by another immigration lawyer whose name is Ben, who was kind of like her coach. And he leaned over to Ngwa and said, she's going to give it to you, because he could see this look of terror. and she did. So that was a pretty moving thing. So the proposals now are that you can get into the United States. Last year, 2 million people came to the southern border asking for asylum. There's no way to put all those people in detention. And people are getting across the border and then released. So the arguments that certain governments from certain southern state governors have about the border problem is a very real argument. The border states are really bearing the mess of the immigration, broken immigration system. I'm not a fan of DeSantis or what's his name in Texas? Yeah, but they have a legitimate beef in that it's just chaos at the border, and it needs to be fixed. And the way to fix it is to overhaul the immigration system. But that it's such a political football. Whoever comes up with a reasonable proposal, the other party is going to be against it. And that's been happening for decades now. And it's really awful that it's happening. So now you can get into the country. You might get into the country and just kind of fade away somewhere and not even see a border agent and say, I entered, and have proof that you entered the country on thus and such a date, and proactively ask for asylum. And that's called the affirmative process. And these first two things do not include judges. They're not going through immigration court. An asylum officer with Homeland Security gets special training for 5 weeks to kind of adjudicate your case and decide whether you qualify for asylum or not. And after they receive your case, they decide. Okay. The second one is the border agent might say, no, we're going to send you back. And you say, no, you can't send me back. They'll kill me if I go back. And you have a credible fear interview, just like Ngwa did. And if your credible fear interview indicate that you're eligible for asylum, then again, a border agent who's been specially trained will give you a decision in 4 to 6 weeks. That's really different than waiting up to 5 years for an asylum hearing before an immigration judge. However, there was a really good article in the New York Times at the end of September, kind of describing how this could and would work. And they said, currently there are 99 border agents that are trained to do this. There are 2 million people crossing the border in a given year. So they're not quite up to speed yet, but they've been watching the results of the cases. They're granting asylum for the same, on the same basis, consistently with what the courts are doing, kind of relatively the same percentages. About 25% of people get asylum that go through this process. And they're ramping up. They want to train some large number of these agents, hire and train, so that they can process up to 150,000 cases a year, which there's millions in, 750,000 backlog, but it's still better than waiting 5 years for your asylum hearing. So that's what's going on with asylum. And Midvale made this commitment to help with asylum seekers. And currently, the way things are going, asylum advocates say that applicants need to provide interpreters for their cases if they don't speak English, and they have 4 to 6 weeks to provide any evidence that they are actually eligible for asylum. And these people are swimming rivers and getting through jungles, and how are they going to get that in 4 to 6 weeks? So it's a pretty short time frame. On the other hand, if you're really eligible for asylum and it gets granted in 4 to 6 weeks, you're infinitely farther along the road than you would be if you went through that, the whole court system. Most people still are going through the court system, adding to the backlog because there just aren't enough of these agents trained yet. But as they ramp that up, it should help. And it's, you know, that's good. The costs are supported by the people applying for asylum. So, you know, think about, you pay a coyote or some low-life person that's just job is to transport people and dump them off in the desert just to get them across the border. They pay these people enormous sums of money, and they're here with nothing, and then the border patrol gets them, and sometimes they seek them out because they want to ask for asylum, but they have no money and they have to pay these huge fees. So there's all this need for support, and the numbers are so large that even here in Dane County, the few pro bono clinics that Dane County itself has legal services, and then the UW clinic and the what do they call them? The other one at Christ Presbyterian Church also does pro bono immigration advice and help. They're just overwhelmed because there's so many people coming now. So it's really a huge crisis, and the need for immigration reform is bigger than ever. So Midvale graciously agreed to sponsor asylum seekers, and the first asylum seeker we got was Snishana, who was not an asylum seeker at all. She was here living with Ann and Jeff and her 2 children, living at their house on a tourist visa. And she and her children applied for temporary protected status. And TPS is a program that applies to certain countries. So the US has a group of countries that it is willing to consider temporary protected status because it believes that those people from those countries can't return to their countries safely. It either here. This is the current list. And if you look at those, there's some really, it's an interesting mix of people. Afghanistan, we all know about the awful withdrawal of the Afghans when they're eligible for TPS. Cameroon is now, it took a while to get them added to the list, but they are. Haiti, Honduras, Nicaragua, many of these, Venezuela, many of these countries in Central America have adversarial relationships with the US, and they won't cooperate about bringing back their citizens at all. And so, and Ukraine's in there too. TPS is temporary. You're granted the ability to stay on a temporary basis. It does not give you a pathway to citizenship. And it once everything's fixed in your country of origin, you go back, right? Well, some of these things are never going to get fixed. And you can keep renewing your TPS application. And so Snejana and her family applied for TPS, and you guys can correct me, but Snejana told me that she's recently applied for asylum, which is interesting. But if you go back, should we go back and look at those asylum criteria again? I don't know how to go backwards on here. Let's see. Wait, here. That's exactly what she said. I applied for asylum, but I don't qualify. But if horrible things happen and Russia actually takes over Ukraine, well, then she'd be a pretty prime candidate to get asylum here, right? What? Yeah. Wait. Yeah.
I'm coming, Ann.
That's different, Ann. But anyway,
Yeah, I only know about her advanced parole.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
a little bit surprised on the asylum because
yeah,
when she came here, she was very adamant that she was not going to apply for asylum
Yeah.
because her country is not against her. It's,
well, that's it. Yeah, they don't qualify for asylum, but it does allow you to stay longer because you've got this, 750,000 court cases ahead of you, and and there's not a 2-year deal, so that's that. And she just kind of mentioned to me that to me in an aside, so she may or may not be an asylum seeker. But let's go back to TPS. So what that meant, what it means is they were really quickly allowed to get work permits. If you're an asylum seeker here, you have to wait 6 months to work. It used to be a year. And that's supposed to deter people who are coming here for employment, right? But people do things like get fake social security cards. Their reason for being here, many of them is only to support their families back home. And I can tell you that Ngwa, he waited. It was really hard for him to wait the 6 months and not work. He's worked hard all his life. And that was a pretty hard time for him to wait. And when he finally got his work permit, it was really hard for us to control just how much that work that guy was doing. He was getting jobs right and left, and he never slept. He still kind of never sleeps. He works his tush off. I mean, he's only working 2 full-time jobs right now. And he's going to grad school. The guy is so driven to support his family and if and when they get here, make a much better life for them. So Snezhana actually ended up being quite a bit ahead coming from Ukraine with TPS because she's got a work permit now. She's applying for jobs and interviewing for jobs. She's she has advanced parole, like Ann just mentioned, and advanced parole gives the applicant the ability to travel. And actually, I can tell them this, right? On Monday, she's going to Ukraine. And she's going back to Ukraine because, and we prayed for him this morning. Do you know, Anne, do you know how, is it Valerie or Valerie? Yeah, that. Talk really loud now. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So Snezhana's mother-in-law is here.
Right.
And then her husband will come back with Snezhana in January 10th. And her husband will come, Jana's
Anna's
husband,
will come.
Valeria. And so then she'll have her in-laws here.
Yeah,
But Vitaly will remain in Ukraine.
Vitaly is Snezhana's husband. So he is still committed for the mail service that the Ukrainian males are doing. But his parents, Jana, who's already here, his mom, and his dad has a serious heart condition, needs a valve replacement, needs open heart surgery. And they told him, we can make sure we have power and heat for the surgery. But when you go home to your 12th floor apartment in Kiev, you may not have power, you may not have cell service. If you get in trouble, you can't call for an ambulance. You may or may not be able to. So they all just decided that it would just be best to bring him here. They, Jana and him, when he gets here, are on Badger Care.
They're here on another program, United for Ukraine.
Yeah, and I'll
which-
talk about that in a minute.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Correct.
yeah. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But so TPS is just a whole different ball game than asylum, and it has its own challenges. But except for not being a path to citizenship, it has some advantages too. There are people in the United States who have been here with TPS for decades. They just keep getting renewed because it's still not safe to send them back to their country of origin. Nancy.
Yeah, Tony, I was just going to add to what I was saying. I had invited Susanna to our Zanta
Right.
party Wednesday night. So that was when she learned that she was able to travel.
Yeah.
And it was obviously, as you know, exceedingly emotional. I mean, it was at the end of the party and she was checking her,
Yeah.
her phone while I was getting my coat and so on. So yeah, it was, and she will visit her mother
Right.
in the Czech Republic.
Yep.
And I think a sister, am I right about that? So she's got all this planned. I mean,
Sorry.
so anyway, I just wanted to
Yeah. So
add that note that was a very exciting, emotional moment.
well, yeah.
for
So
me
she's
also, yeah.
been planning to go sneak back to Ukraine as soon as she got this travel permit, which she applied for right off the bat as soon as she was able, because she wants to see her husband again. And so so that's what's going on. So grandma is home with Arena and Daniel while she travels starting tomorrow. So that's pretty exciting. And we sure all the best. One thing that I wouldn't have thought of mentoring somebody is that she said, Tony, she said, do you know anyone who can, do you know any lawyers who can make me a will? And I said, well, there's probably lawyers at church. Maybe somebody at church could help you. So I called Pastor Blake and he said, well, the only lawyers I know of are Ben Kempinen and Jim Olson. And so I called it, and Ben's a retired law school professor. So I called Jim Olson's office and he found and then I told Snezhana that I had help for him to get this will made. And she goes, well, I need it before Monday because I'm leaving on Monday. This is like Thursday this week. And I went, we'll never get a will by Monday. Well, lo and behold, I talked to this guy in Jim Olson's office who's doing it for pro bono. He interviewed her on Thursday. She signed the papers on Thursday and she's got a will so that in the event something happens to her, when she makes this journey, which could be dangerous because she will be going into Ukraine, and she will be spending time with her husband. If something happens, Arena isn't a ward of the state because she doesn't have a legal guardian here established. So who knew that we were going to be dealing with stuff like that? That was pretty interesting. But thank you, Midvale. The help, right? So the next thing I wanted to talk about is something that Ann touched about. Uniting for Ukraine is a unique program created for Ukrainians, and it is basically a version of humanitarian parole. And humanitarian parole is granted for a period of 2 years. It is not a pathway to citizenship, and it requires a US sponsor who can demonstrate that they have the financial ability to support the person while they're in the US. It's not a legal obligation, but what you do is we actually did this for Ngua's wife and daughter. We filled out the application demonstrating that we had money to back them should they get to the United States. They don't care how much money the person has that's coming. They want to know that somebody in the US has kind of got their back. And we're talking about whether you have means to support somebody barely above the poverty level. So you don't have to demonstrate too much financial means to do it. In the end, we ended up not applying for humanitarian parole for Aqua and Ann on behalf of Ngua, because he thinks it's still better for them to come on the basis of him getting, that was before he got asylum. Now they're eligible to come because of his asylum. And he's an asylee. He just applied for his green card. And another example of the immigration system is, I looked up the waiting time to get your green card once you apply, 37 months. So everything is just so broken and decimated. So Snezhana and the Munsons, you guys were the financial sponsors for Jana and for Valeria, right? They just had to demonstrate that they have the means to help them if they need it. So now he's coming back with her and he'll have his surgery. They're eligible for Medicaid when they get here, and he can get the surgery he needs and the care he needs afterwards. So that's so pretty much everybody but Snezhana's husband will be here, which is good. And once you get here, if you want to stay in the United States, you can apply for asylum if you meet those narrow criteria for asylum. So does anybody have any questions about all that? Where'd it go? I know there's another slide. Oh, I just want to show you this. Uniting for Ukraine is something, people did this. They came up with this, Uniting for Ukraine. And you can bet that the rest of the countries on that list of TPS countries don't have programs like this. And one of the things that they did for Uniting for Ukraine is they partnered with this welcome.us group, and they send people, if you're a US citizen and you want to help get a Ukrainian family or person to safety, you can work through this. Oh, I can't do this. I was hoping I could open up this website and have it show, but it's not. They will connect you with the Ukrainian family, and you can fill out this financial paperwork and sponsor them and get them out of Ukraine to safety. So none of the other TPS countries have programs like this, except for Afghanistan. The Afghans also are in a humanitarian parole situation. They are not refugees. they were paroled into the United States. And that's a really bad situation. If you want to become a helpful person on the immigration landscape, there are lots of ways that you can contact your senator and congresspeople saying, please support the Afghan Adjustment Act. The Afghan Adjustment Act, basically the people from Afghan came they got given humanitarian parole for 2 years. And then their status is uncertain. They're not on a path to citizenship. They're not refugees. And there is a bill before Congress, the Afghan Adjustment Act, that Amy Klobuchar sponsored, saying, we got to just make these people basically adjust their status to asylees and put them on a path to a green card and citizenship. And, I couldn't be more in favor of that. How could we get people out of here who had supported the US all those years and then not give them the support they need here once they get here? So that's my my side story there.
Tony, I had a quick question, which
Yeah.
is Ingua's wife and daughter, I keep kind of expecting to see them, but I wonder if they
Yeah.
have a timeline for when they're going to come.
There's one person in particular who is expecting to see them, and he's really struggling. So here's the deal. Maggie applied for expedited arrival for them, and they got granted expedited arrival in July. Are they here yet? So the process for that is they get granted expedited arrival. US Customs and Immigration sends that to the National Visa Processing Center. And sometime between July and October, they lost their application. And then, and we've been working with Mark Polkan's office on this. So after a period of, usually it's 1 to 2 months, you can go back to the congressman's office and say, okay, we still haven't heard yet. We've done our waiting, and ask again. And the advantage to working with a member of Congress is that they have to answer them. They don't have to answer Ngwa when he inquires, which he does. But they have to answer the US member of the Senate or House of Representatives. So suddenly, after Luann from Polkan's office inquired again, what do you know? The National Visa Processing Center received this application in October and said, don't call us, we'll call you. And what's supposed to happen next is after they review it and they're supposed to forward it to the US Embassy in Cameroon and go from there. At that point, was supposed to get a welcome letter, and so is Aqua. And it's hard to communicate. He can communicate with her, but it's not easy. And so he needs to get everything as the petitioner. He found out the other day that they have forwarded it to the US Embassy in Cameroon, but he's never gotten any welcome letter. And he's like, is this real or not? I don't want to get my hopes up again. He's just, he's just kind of over the waiting. He's been really struggling with all this lately, but it's another step. And if that really is the case, then what will happen is she'll have to go to Yaoundé to the US Embassy and get interviewed, and she'll have to pass her interview matching all the documents between him and her. And then they would issue visas and do medical exams and then come here. So So keep praying. Yes. Yeah, so the question is she in danger? She's in danger. They are in danger every day. The government soldiers go down the streets of their town and just fire randomly into houses. If they hear shouting, they all dive underneath their beds and pray they don't get hit. And that's their existence. Anne goes to school. She's 5 now. She's in school, but they have to go outside and wait to hear gunfire or not. And if they think they can make it to the school, they run there and they get there. And then Akko says, I'll come and get you when I think it's safe. I mean, that's their daily existence. So he's in, deeply worried every day. To make the journey from Bamenda, where they live in the Northwest, to Yaoundé, which is the French capital of, it's a very perilous journey, and it's the next phase of worry. So all of it is dangerous, but it's the way to get out.
Tony, thank you. Nancy
welcome.
says thank you online too. So thanks. Yeah. We'll give her a hand. So next week we'll have Gary Hine and Eric James and the Candy Bomber story from Berlin in 1945. And it's intergenerational. So if you have Sunday school students who don't have Sunday school, please bring them, and hopefully we'll have a big group. So thanks.